All right, guys. So tomorrow we're going to be jumping into the first few pages of The Giver. But before we do, there are a few things I want to cover. Here's what we're going to be looking at. Our learning targets for the unit and for our lesson, some background information on The Giver, the basics of setting, and an annotation technique. Let's start by taking a look at our learning targets. Our unit target is I can define, identify, and analyze the basic fictional story elements in order to support and enhance my reading of The Giver. Which means, as we're reading The Giver, we're going to be looking at basic fictional story elements, things such as setting, plot, and characters, to name a few. We're going to work toward defining, or knowing what these things are, identifying, or being able to find these elements within the text, and analyzing, which means being able to see how these elements work together within the story. Now for the lesson target. I can utilize annotation techniques to enhance my understanding of the setting and its impact on the novel as a whole using the first few pages of The Giver. Which basically means we're going to take the first few pages of the book and I'll show you how to annotate or mark it up in ways that allow you to see the setting more clearly and see how the setting is important to the overall story. Okay, now for a little bit of background information on the book before you start reading tomorrow. The Giver was written by Lois Lowry in 1993. Lowry has written over 20 books and received 2 awards, one being the Newbery Medal for The Giver. The novel was partly inspired by Lowry's relationship with her father, who was at the time in a nursing home having lost most of his long-term memory. The Giver is Lowry's attempt to criticize reality by creating a utopian society, but we will quickly realize that this utopia is actually a dystopia. The Giver ranks number 11 out of 100 on the ALA's list of most challenged titles from 1990 to 1999. This was because the novel touches on some very hot-button issues for the time, including abortion, family ethics, euthanasia, and assisted suicide. The genre of The Giver is science fiction, and it's categorized as dystopian literature. As a genre, science fiction deals with imaginary worlds, people, and technology. Dystopian lit is a subgenre of sci-fi, and it's used to provide fresh perspectives on problematic social and political practices that might otherwise be taken for granted or considered natural and inevitable. Societies and settings may sometimes be completely different than our own in order for us to compare and contrast them. Now, when reading science fiction, it's always important to embrace the suspension of disbelief. The suspension of disbelief refers to the willingness of a person, in this case you, the reader, to accept as true the premises of a work of fiction, even if they are fantastic or impossible. Basically, in The Giver, you're asked to accept the world of the novel as realistic, or be able to let go of what you know to be true, in order to gain an understanding of the issues and ideas the author is trying to express. So let's get started. Tomorrow, we will be focusing on the setting of The Giver. The setting of a story is the time and place that it happens. Every setting has a story. The setting helps create the mood of a story, influencing how readers feel about the text. Let's take a story about a boy and a girl playing hide and seek, for example. If our conflict is that the girl cannot find the boy no matter how hard she looks, the setting would have a huge impact on how the reader feels while reading. If the story took place in a candy shop during the day, it might have a happy or playful mood. But if this story took place in a cemetery at night, the mood would be downright scary. So, the setting not only lets you know when and where you are, but it gives you a clue to the novel's overall mood or feel. Now we know what setting is, but how are we going to find it in the text? Well, we are going to try a new annotation technique that hits all of the critical thinking and reading comprehension strategies that are seen on all of your standardized tests. Here's how it works. We need 4 different highlighters. We need a blue highlighter, a yellow highlighter, an orange highlighter, and a pink highlighter. As I go through the purpose of each highlighter, we'll work through the first 2 paragraphs of the novel together. But before we start, we should always do a first read. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times. Squinting toward the sky, he had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then, one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. At first, he had been only fascinated. He had never seen an aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field across the river, the children rode their bicycles to the riverbank and watched, intrigued, the unloading and then the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. When annotating, we will always start with our blue highlighter, our blueprint. Our blueprint helps us set our purpose for reading. In this case, our purpose for reading is identifying the setting. So let's look at the passage again. This time we will highlight in blue anything that obviously describes our setting, when and where our story takes place. Right off the bat, I noticed December. That tells me what time of year it is. The next thing that sticks out to me as setting is the community. This tells me that they consider themselves a community. Then I see there's a landing field across the river, which is a simple physical description. And I also noticed some repetition of the community, so I'll go ahead and highlight in those other places too. Now don't worry if you don't have a whole lot of highlighting going on in a specific color, or if you wouldn't have highlighted the same thing as me. Reading is an extremely individual experience, and each of us are going to have our own thoughts and ideas on different things. A little healthy debate is always welcome. Now, once we feel like we have some basic idea of setting, we can move on to our yellow highlighter, our caution light. Our caution light reminds us to slow down and take a little deeper look into our purpose. In our case of setting, we should consider things that maybe describe the setting in a non-physical way, or any ideas of setting that contribute to the mood or feel so far. The first thing I see to highlight in yellow is squinting toward the sun. This tells me that it was daytime when Jonas was frightened by the plane. The next thing I noticed was that it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community, which tells me that the community has rules and that this is one of them. The text also tells me that food is at least sometimes delivered by cargo planes. And then, as I was reading through again, I noticed the phrase, children rode their bicycles. But when I thought about it, I realized I think it's just more basic physical description than deeper analysis. So I'm going to go back and go ahead and make that highlight blue. There's nothing wrong with going back to a color. Then, once we feel like we have exhausted our purpose and deeper analysis, we can move on to orange, our construction cone. Our construction cone says, whoa, hold up, something doesn't quite click here. When using the orange highlighter, we highlight things that confuse us or things that we have questions about. Then we write our questions out beside it. I found two things that seemed curious to me. The first one is here, and I wonder why a plane is scary. The other one, here, why is it a rule that they can't fly over the community? It's always helpful to have questions ready for discussion. You never know if someone else in class has the same question, or if your question could uncover a whole new way to view the chapter or novel. Then, once we've explored all of our questions, we go on to our final highlighter, pink, our heart. Our heart makes all of the love connections. We use our pink highlighter to highlight all of our text-to-text connections, text-to-self connections, and text-to-world connections. Remember, text-to-text connections are connections that can be made to another book or story, or to another part of the same book or story. Text-to-self connections are connections that you can make with an experience that you have had or that someone close to you has had. Text-to-world connections are connections that you make to the larger world, significant events or people of the past, present, or future. Personally, I make a strong text-to-self connection with the lines, "No, wrong word," Jonas thought. Before deciding to become a teacher, I wanted to write books of my own. When writing, I think I felt like I was using the wrong word way more than I felt like I was using the right one. So I'll highlight that in pink and write out next to it TTS for text-to-self connection. I didn't see anything else that really stuck out to me as text to text or text to world in these 2 paragraphs, and that's okay. But it also doesn't mean that you didn't find anything or that you won't. So, those are the ins and outs of our new annotation technique. I truly believe it will help you get a better understanding of what you read, not only with the giver, but with anything you read. If you need to go back and review certain things in the video before tomorrow, feel free. That's why we're doing this. Like we talked about in class, I'm going to be doing the first few presentations to kind of get us in the swing of things and let you know what I'm looking for. I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate you guys trying out this flipped classroom with me, and I'm confident that it will be a great experience for all of us. Have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.